The Grand Archive of the Astral Confederation stretched across an entire moon, its crystalline spires housing the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 species across 50,000 years. Deep within its labyrinthine corridors, First Archivist Nexel's tentacles trembled as they processed the latest sensor data from the outer rim. The energy signatures were impossible to mistake. Primitive nuclear fission, paired with early attempts at fusion containment. Yet something about the readings from this unremarkable yellow star system defied conventional analysis. Most curious, Nexel murmured, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with interest. The development pattern shows significant deviation from established models. The species designated Sol-3 primary had progressed from discovering atomic structure to achieving rudimentary spaceflight in less than 3 centuries, an unprecedented pace that should have resulted in their own destruction. Yet they persisted, their civilization expanding despite what the Confederation's most advanced sociological models predicted. Prepare a preliminary assessment for the High Council. Nexel commanded their attendant AIs. Classification: primitive pre-spacefaring civilization. Threat assessment: negligible. Recommended action: standard resource acquisition protocols. The High Council would barely glance at such a routine report. The galaxy was vast, and primitive species discovering basic atomic theory were common enough to be hardly worth noting. The Confederation had supervised the rise and fall of countless civilizations, guiding some to enlightenment, allowing others to follow their natural course to extinction. But Nexel felt an unfamiliar sensation as they filed the report. Doubt. Something about these humans didn't fit the patterns established over millennia of observation. Their technological progression was chaotic, inefficient, and yet effective. Where other species followed predictable paths of development, these humans seemed to stumble forward in great leaps, solving problems in ways that defied conventional logic. The First Archivist's concerns were dismissed by the High Council. Resource Extraction Fleet Delta 459 was dispatched to Sol-3, designated Earth by its inhabitants. The fleet's mission was simple: establish a quarantine perimeter, begin systematic extraction of required materials, and ensure the primitive inhabitants remained unaware of their activities. Admiral Vix stood on the command deck of the flagship Eternal Wisdom, watching as the fleet prepared to enter the Sol system. Their vessels represented the pinnacle of Confederation technology, perfectly efficient, practically invisible to primitive sensors, and equipped with defenses that could neutralize threats from civilizations far more advanced than these humans. Final approach vector calculated, the ship's AI announced. Entering system in 3 temporal units. The first indication that something was wrong came when half the fleet's sensor arrays simultaneously failed. The second came moments later, when 3 ships simply disappeared from formation, their quantum signatures vanishing as if they'd never existed. Unknown energy weapon. The tactical officer's crystalline form vibrated with alarm. They're using some form of directed gravity pulse. Admiral Vix's compound eyes widened in disbelief. Impossible. Their technology level was confirmed by multiple surveys. They shouldn't even be able to detect us, let alone. The tactical display erupted with new contacts. Hundreds of small vessels emerged from behind Sol-3's single moon, their drives operating on principles that the Confederation's sensors couldn't classify. They moved with impossible acceleration, their trajectories defying the basic laws of physics as understood by Confederation science. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. A transmission cut through the Confederation's supposedly impenetrable communication security. Your vessels have entered restricted space and engaged in hostile actions. Stand down immediately, or we will be forced to respond with appropriate measures. The humans had not only detected their approach, they had prepared an ambush. Moreover, they had developed weapons capable of affecting ships that, according to all known science, should have been untouchable by their level of technology. The implications were staggering. How? Vix demanded of their science officer. How did they achieve this level of advancement without us detecting it? A crisis emerged when the humans insisted on incorporating emotional considerations into trade agreements. The very notion seemed absurd to the Confederation, until the humans demonstrated how empathy-driven trade relationships consistently outperformed purely logical arrangements. "You're not just trading goods," Chen explained during one particularly tense session. "You're building relationships, trust, understanding. These things have value beyond mathematical calculation." The breakthrough came during a cultural exchange that nearly ended in disaster. A Confederation delegation, attempting to honor human customs, had inadvertently created a situation that could have triggered a diplomatic incident. Instead of the expected rigid protocol, the humans laughed, adapted, and turned the mistake into an opportunity for genuine connection. "They're teaching us without teaching," Lyra realized. "Their very presence forces us to think differently." As negotiations progressed, the Confederation began to understand that human diplomatic power came not from their technology or military might, but from their ability to forge genuine connections across seemingly insurmountable differences. They didn't just make allies. They built friendships. The final treaty draft reflected this unique approach. It wasn't the most efficient solution by Confederation standards, but it was something entirely new, a framework for genuine cooperation that could grow and adapt like a living thing. A new dawn. The transformation of the Confederation happened not with grand declarations or dramatic reforms, but through countless small changes. 5 years after first contact, the effects of human influence rippled through every aspect of galactic civilization. Research facilities across Confederation space began adopting what they called the human method, pursuing multiple approaches to problems simultaneously, encouraging controlled chaos in pursuit of breakthrough innovations. Success rates in technological development tripled. "They've infected us with their inefficiency," Second Speaker Vorn complained during a council session, "and somehow we're better for it." The humans had introduced concepts that seemed nonsensical to the Confederation's ordered mindset: intentional redundancy, creative failure, intuitive leads. Species that had been stagnant for millennia began to advance again, freed from self-imposed limitations. Most surprisingly, the Confederation discovered that humans had a gift for bringing out the best in other species. Their persistent curiosity and acceptance of differences led to unprecedented cooperation between formerly isolated civilizations. A Cyrillian scientist, inspired by human approaches, revolutionized quantum computing by intentionally introducing errors into previously perfect systems. A Myraxian fleet commander adopted human-style distributed command, transforming their defense forces' effectiveness. Even the rigid Confederation bureaucracy began to show signs of flexibility. But perhaps the most profound change came in how the Confederation viewed the galaxy itself. The humans' insistence that nothing was truly impossible had awakened something long dormant in even the oldest species: wonder. We had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe, First Archivist Nexel reflected in their final report, but they showed us that mastery is not the same as understanding. In their brief lives, they never stopped questioning, never stopped dreaming, never stopped trying to reach beyond their grasp. As humanity spread through the galaxy, they didn't just adapt to the existing order, they transformed it. Their colonies became melting pots of species and ideas, their universities attracted students from across the galaxy, and their seemingly chaotic approach to innovation sparked a renaissance in Confederation science and culture. The final transformation came quietly, when the Confederation Council voted to rename itself the Galactic Cooperative. It was a small change that reflected a massive shift, from a civilization that sought to impose order on the galaxy to one that embraced the creative chaos that humans had shown them was so vital for growth. "We thought we were perfect," Supreme Commander Zix told their successor. "The humans showed us that perfection is just another word for finished growing." As new species were discovered on the galactic frontier, the cooperative approached them differently, not as primitives to be managed or resources to be exploited, but as potential partners who might see the universe in ways no one had imagined before. And somewhere on Earth, A child looked up at the stars and asked, "Why?" Continuing humanity's endless quest to push beyond the possible, carrying the galaxy with them into an uncertain but limitless future. Warriors of a different kind. The Confederation's Military Analysis Division had never encountered a species that fought quite like humans. Supreme Commander Zix studied the tactical displays with growing fascination as another simulation played out. "They're protecting their weakest ships," they noted, watching as human vessels maneuvered in seemingly chaotic patterns, sacrificing tactical advantage to preserve damaged units. The behavior made no sense by Confederation standards. Their own fleets operated with perfect efficiency, discarding damaged units to maintain optimal combat effectiveness. Yet somehow, the human approach yielded better results. Their command structure is equally puzzling. Strategic analyst Mira added, her energy form flickering with confusion. Authority flows both up and down their chain of command. Individual units often operate autonomously, adapting to circumstances without waiting for orders. The displays showed countless examples of human ship captains making independent decisions, coordinating with their peers rather than waiting for central command. What should have been a recipe for chaos instead produced an adaptability that the Confederation's rigid hierarchy couldn't match. They evolved as pack hunters, Zix remembered from the biological reports. Their entire species developed around coordinated group action, each individual capable of both leading and following as circumstances require. The implications were profound. Where Confederation forces fought as perfectly coordinated but inflexible units, human fleets operated more like living organisms, each part capable of independent action while maintaining collective purpose. A new alert drew their attention. The humans were deploying what appeared to be civilian ships modified for combat. Mining vessels retrofitted with military-grade weapons, passenger liners converted into carriers, even private yachts serving as fast attack craft. They're adapting civilian technology for warfare, Mira observed. The inefficiency is staggering, but it works, Zix finished. They can replace losses faster than any species we've encountered, precisely because they don't require perfection. The humans had turned their greatest weaknesses into strengths. Their short lifespans meant they could train new crews quickly, their technological limitations forced them to be creative, and their inefficient command structure made them incredibly resilient. As if to prove this point, a new tactical scenario unfolded. A human fleet had lost its flagship and central command. Rather than falling into disarray as Confederation forces would, the remaining ships seamlessly reorganized, continuing their mission under emergent leadership. They don't fight like warriors, Zix realized. They fight like survivors. Every ship, every crew member equipped to adapt, to take command, to find solutions we would never consider. The final analysis was clear. The Confederation had spent 50,000 years perfecting the art of warfare, creating fleets of unmatched efficiency and power. The humans had spent their brief existence learning to survive against all odds, creating warriors who simply refused to accept defeat. In the observation chamber, Supreme Commander Zix made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. They began composing a recommendation to the High Council. The human approach to warfare represents not a primitive state, but an advanced adaptation we must study and learn from. The diplomatic dance. The Grand Diplomatic Chamber of the Confederation had never hosted negotiations quite like these. The human delegation sat across from representatives of 17 advanced species, their short lifespans and biological limitations seemingly insignificant against the collected wisdom of 50,000 years. Chief Diplomat Lyra observed the humans with all four of their sensory clusters. Where most species approached Confederation negotiations with appropriate awe, these humans showed only focused curiosity. They seemed entirely unintimidated by beings who had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. "Your proposal is inefficient," Lyra stated, reviewing the humans' suggested treaty terms. "Our models indicate 17 better approaches to resource sharing." Ambassador Sarah Chen smiled, a gesture that still unsettled many Confederation species. "Efficiency isn't always the best measure of success," she replied. "Sometimes the scenic route gets you to better destinations." The human concept of compromise baffled the Confederation's diplomatic corps. Their mathematical models could calculate optimal solutions to any conflict, yet the humans insisted on what they called fair solutions that often defied logical optimization. "They negotiate like they fight," Lyra's assistant observed privately, adapting, probing, finding unexpected paths to their objectives. The answer, when it came, shook the very foundations of Confederation doctrine. The humans hadn't followed the established paths of technological development. They hadn't discovered gravity manipulation through careful study of quantum fields, or developed their weapons through centuries of incremental advancement. Instead, they had simply decided certain things should be possible, then stubbornly worked until they found ways to make them happen. As the Earth Defense Force surrounded the remaining Confederation ships, Admiral Vix realized that the greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating human technology. It had been assuming they would follow any sort of logical progression at all. These beings had looked at the impossible and treated it as merely a challenge to be overcome. The price of that ignorance was about to become very clear indeed. The human factor. The Confederation's Central Analysis Chamber had never seen such chaos. Holographic displays flickered with countless data streams as the greatest minds of 17 species struggled to understand how their most basic assumptions had been shattered. "Their shield technology defies conventional physics," Senior Analyst Crix announced, their crystalline form vibrating with frustrated confusion. "They're not deflecting our weapons. They're somehow converting the energy into computational processing power." The assembled analysts watched as footage from the failed invasion played again. A Confederation energy lance, capable of cutting through a small moon, struck a human vessel. Instead of vaporizing the primitive craft, the energy seemed to flow through its hull like water through a turbine. Moments later, the human ship's capabilities noticeably increased. "They call it adaptive shielding," Crix continued. "Each attack makes their defenses stronger. They're using our own weapons to evolve their technology in real time." First Archivist Nexel, newly appointed to the emergency analysis team, felt their earlier doubts crystallize into certainty. "Show me their research facilities," they demanded. The displays shifted to show thousands of laboratories scattered across Earth and its colonies. Unlike the Confederation's perfectly optimized research centers, human facilities were chaotic, redundant, and seemingly inefficient. Different teams worked on similar problems without coordination, following competing theories and often pursuing paths that had been mathematically proven impossible. "Wasteful," one analyst noted. "Their resource allocation is completely irrational." "Is it?" Nexel challenged. "Look at their success rate in technological innovation. They achieve in decades what takes us centuries." The truth was becoming clear. Where the Confederation pursued technological advancement through careful, logical progression, humans threw themselves at problems from every conceivable angle. Their very inefficiency was their greatest strength. 1,000 teams failing meant one might find a solution no one had thought possible. "They don't respect impossibility," Nexel observed. "When our models say something cannot be done, we accept it. When humans encounter the impossible, they treat it as a personal challenge." A new alert drew their attention. The humans had begun deploying a technology that should not exist: quantum communication devices that operated without entanglement. They had somehow achieved faster-than-light communication by simply refusing to accept that it couldn't be done. "Their entire approach to physics is wrong," a theoretical specialist protested. "They're not following the fundamental laws." "Perhaps," Nexel responded, their bioluminescence pulsing with growing excitement. "We've been too focused on following laws, and not enough on finding exceptions." The implications were staggering. Every law of physics the Confederation had discovered might simply be a limitation they'd accepted too easily. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology. It was their stubborn refusal to accept limitations. As if to emphasize this point, new data began flooding in. The human fleet was adapting again. their ships incorporating principles they couldn't possibly understand yet somehow made work. They weren't advancing along any recognizable technological path. They were simply trying everything until something worked. How do we predict a species that doesn't follow logical progression? Someone asked. Nexel's answer was simple. We don't. We learn from them instead. For the first time in 50,000 years, the Confederation faced a species that might actually have something new to teach them. The price of their ignorance had become a priceless opportunity. If they were willing to learn humanity's most valuable lesson, nothing is truly impossible until you accept that it is.